And it's a wonderful, good, cold, rainy afternoon. Welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. My name, of course, is Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. Right, so last week we had two special guests. We had the Palestinian ambassador, Ambassador Zumlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom. We also had Ambassador Michael Freeman, the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria. Okay? It was a very interesting interview. I've had many messages. I can see some of you are still discussing it on social media, even up until this afternoon. When I went for my lunch, I saw that there were many discussions going on. Now, here's the thing. During my conversation with Ambassador Freeman last week, we went back and forth on a lot of things. We disagreed, and it's not about disagreeing. It's about the fact that he had his fact. I was presenting another fact. Of course, this is a conflict situation, so needless to say, everybody will have theirs, or both sides will have theirs. However, today, I have a special guest. I had to record him in advance because he couldn't make it. So I did an interview with him, a pre-recorded interview with him, actually yesterday. I'm going to want you to listen to that. It should only be about 40 minutes, after which I am going to open the show. The line you will be calling once I open the show after my special guest, and I'll tell you who it is, 0201 277 0993 or 0201 465 7190. You will be able to send WhatsApp as I'm playing my interview with him to 0809 597 5805. We are streaming on YouTube, Nigeria Info, YouTube Nigeria Info. You can do hashtag Borderlines. We are on social media, Twitter at Nigeria Info FM Lagos, and also on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos. They're trying to get my interview on the show. They're trying to find it, actually. That's why this is taking a little bit of time. So we had a lot has happened, and of course, as you all know, a lot. A week is a long time in politics. A week is a long time in during wartime as well. So Israel's war on Gaza, a week is a very, very long time. There have been some revelations that came out this week, actually the day after my interview with Ambassador Freeman. There was revelation evidence actually that came out about the paramedics, the 15 paramedics and aid workers, Palestinian paramedics and aid workers who were killed in Gaza. You remember Ambassador Freeman and I discussed that. Additional evidence has come out. I don't want to give too much away because I'm trying to give them time to play my interview so I don't ruin the interview for you. So let me tell you who my guest is. My guest is Daniel Levy. You all know Daniel Levy is a friend of the show. He's actually a friend of the station. He's been here before. He's an Israeli. He's a Jewish Israeli. He's an analyst. He's an author. And incidentally, he was also he worked with Ehud Barak. You will hear about Ehud Barak during this show and also during my interview with Ambassador Freeman. Are we ready to play this interview? Are we ready to play the interview? Are we ready? I don't understand. I'm waiting to see are we ready to play this interview? Yes or no? Okay, it would appear that we need to play some adverts because the station, they're not ready for me. Can we play some adverts and get this thing ready?
This is Downfall Conversation.
Downfall Conversation.
Sometimes, even if your president wants to do the best for you, they will tell him, my friend, don't do that.
These things don't just go away like,
Tune in round the clock for the best of radio programming.
It's Nigeria's station for talk.
Let's talk.
Here on Info. Here on...
Welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. Today I have another friend of the house, a wonderful guest by the name of Daniel Levy. He's a former negotiator. He is an author, is an analyst, and is also used to work for one of the Israeli Hello, Lagos, Nigeria, wherever you're listening to us from. Welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. Today, I have another friend of the house, a wonderful guest by the name of Daniel Levy. He's a former negotiator. He is an author, is an analyst, and is also used to work for one of the Israeli presidents whose name goes out of my head right now because I was trying to remember all his profile. Hello, Daniel. Welcome again to Borderlands.
Hello. I'm glad I've been accorded the status of a friend of the house. That's good to know.
But you are. This
good. Thank you, Ireti.
Your second or third time. So we'll get fast to it because we don't have much time. I'd like you to talk to us. So in January, we had the ceasefire, which was, it wasn't great. Everybody was happy with a huge relief. It was pushed by Donald Trump or the table in around a year ago. And then suddenly there were supposed to be discussions which are phase 2, which were to start 16 days after phase 1. Then all we knew, the next thing is, boom, the ceasefire stops. Tell us what happened, if you can, what you believe led to the sudden, Israel's sudden pulling out of the ceasefire.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to start with recalling just how bad things are there. I know everyone deals with their immediate surroundings and troubles. This is a situation where across 18 months, and I don't want to pretend history began on October 7th and what was done by the militant groups out of Gaza to Israelis in those surrounding areas was itself a violation of international law, building on all Israel's violations of international law across the decades. But on day one, Israel announces it's going to close food, fuel, water, electricity, collective punishment, indiscriminate bombing. And every day you've seen the 2 million plus Palestinians who live in Gaza being bombed, moving from one place to another. All the schools, the hospitals, the public buildings, shelters, houses of worship, mosques and churches. So this has just been the most horrendous of times, and the humanitarian tragedy piling up on the direct effects of the bombings. Now, it's a quite remarkable moment where after a year plus of negotiations, and after pretty much the same deal as you suggested, Ireti, has been on the table for so long, finally, the eve of Trump's inauguration, the day before, a ceasefire comes into effect, and it seems that what was the crucial switch that occurred wasn't that anything changed in the terms of the agreements, but that Netanyahu looked at this and he said, I'm not exactly sure how things are going to play out with Trump. I don't want to start on his bad side. He sent his envoy before they even took office. He sent his envoy. So you had the old team and the new team negotiating. It was clear who the Israelis were listening to more. Unfortunately, they absolutely had they knew how to manage Biden rather too easily. And Netanyahu makes a call that even if it was going to cost him politically, domestically, right? And even if it's not what he wanted to do, he'd get some of the Israelis being held back and he would get off on the right footing with Trump. And he agrees to the ceasefire. And it's not respected in its entirety, especially not by the Israeli side, but it largely holds. And it holds for those 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, Netanyahu sets about testing his freedom of maneuver under Trump, right? So the first foreign leader to get that White House audience is Benjamin Netanyahu. And he worked hard to get that. It was important to him. He knows how influential the US is on Israel. Israel couldn't do this without American weapons flowing constantly. And Netanyahu, I think, first of all, if people remember, there's this rather bizarre and grotesque announcement by Trump where he says, you know, it's a great piece of real estate. It's on the Mediterranean. I'm going to build the Gaza Riviera. And then some weeks later, this people can look it up. This crazy video comes out, AI generated, of kind of what Trump Towers in Gaza would look like. Netanyahu reaches the conclusion that he could get away with doing what he had wanted to do, which is to violate the ceasefire, break this, and that Trump would not call him out on it. It's not universally popular in Israel that he breaks the ceasefire. It means the rest of the Israelis being held don't get out. But what does it give Netanyahu? Crucially, it gives him a stronger coalition. Okay, his coalition was wafer thin, and he needed to get a budget passed. Now, you know, this is the kind of local political detail I wouldn't expect people to be familiar with. But in Israeli parliamentary law, you have until the end of the third month of the year to pass a budget, or elections are automatically triggered. So he breaks the ceasefire a couple of weeks before ending of that deadline in March. And within days, he's got a broader coalition. The extreme right come back in and he gets his budget passed. And he obviously thought he could get away with it. And thus far, he has gotten away with it.
And this is it. Would that be why many claim that the Ramadan massacre was on that Tuesday deliberately to suit Netanyahu and exactly what you said is going on in Israel?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, let me put it like this. Inside Israel itself, there is deep division and polarization. I wish the end of this sentence, Ireti, was over how we treat the Palestinians. And that's not the end of the sentence, unfortunately. That's not to say that there is not a community of Jewish Israelis who do care, who are, you know, deeply troubled and against the way Palestinians are treated. But the real split, and this is where it's more like 50-50, and it may even be a majority on the side of what I'm about to say, is Israelis for whom it's not the question of what we're doing to the Palestinians, but it's a question of why are we doing this? Why have we put at risk a deal that saw the Israelis being held coming home? People probably saw those images, the Israelis being released, often in ceremonies. Some were more unpleasant than others, but they were getting the Israelis out. Why would you put an end to that? Why would you put at risk the rest of the Israelis being held? Why would you send your military back in for no obvious purpose other than, and that's what I'm saying, inside Israel, there is a significant, and I think it's at least 50% who are convinced that Netanyahu was doing this for narrow personal political considerations. This is a guy who's also every week in a court in Jerusalem facing charges of corruption. So he tries to get out of his appearances in court. Sometimes it's because he's got a vital overseas visit or there's some security emergency that comes up. So all these considerations are nothing to do with Israeli security, Israeli defense, any long-term plan for how we're going to resolve this, let alone the immediate priority of getting the Israelis out. And of course, forget any consideration of what this does to the Palestinians.
Last week, I had, my guest was the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Ambassador Michael Freeman. And I asked him the same question. I did say to him, why did Israel pull out of the ceasefire deal? He said because Hamas refused to lay down their arms. To which I did say to him, the third phase, that was to be in the third phase. That wasn't the second phase. Why do you believe, or what do you believe Hamas, where do you think Hamas failed during the whole ceasefire? Because there was supposed to be a phase 1, there was a phase 2, and there was a phase 3. Where do you think Hamas failed? Did they fail in phase 1 or they didn't? What are your thoughts?
Well, the truth is, and this isn't about, who are the good guys here. The truth is, to reach a deal, you need a realistic, a reasonable outcome, a reasonable negotiating position that both sides can sign up to. Now, Hamas's position was not Israel has to end the entire occupation of all the Palestinian territories, disarm from its offensive weapons that have caused the killing of 60,000 Palestinians. Hamas's position, and the bizarre thing maybe, is that it aligns even with the US position under Biden at least, was that Israel simply had to withdraw from Gaza back to the positions that it previously held, and that there would be a ceasefire. Hamas would then respect the ceasefire. Hamas would not target Israelis. There would be a mutual release. All the Israelis would get out. Nowhere in the document that was agreed and guaranteed by the Americans, nowhere in the document does it say Hamas demilitarization, laying down its arms, handing in those arms. So that's the Israeli ambassador just not being honest with you. That was an Israeli position. Israel went into the deal knowing that that position had not been accepted by the other side. Israel could say, well, to get to phase 3, maybe this wasn't in the agreed framework, but we would like it to be in the permanent framework. But there were things that were in the framework, and Israel consistently refused to implement those things and consistently said it would not implement those things, including the ceasefire, including the withdrawal. But it's a much bigger question, Ireti, because I'm not sure I know of a situation where the armed wing of a liberation movement, whether it's Mkhonto Isiswe in South Africa, whether it's the IRA in Ireland, we can go across history. I don't think I know of an example where the armed wing of a resistance movement lays down its weapons without any significant progress on the political questions, the core questions of the conflict. And Israel is not offering to even negotiate those questions. I am aware, of course, of instances where how those weapons would be used went to a different place. In other words, there's a difference between saying, okay, we won't target civilians. There's a difference between saying, we may not display our weapons for a period of time to give these talks a chance. But the idea that an armed resistance movement, first of all, the idea that you have resistance without an armed wing very rarely happens. The Palestinians, under international law, have the right to resist an illegal belligerent occupation and the structural violence occupation, which is precisely what Israel is doing. And according to the International Court of Justice, it's apartheid. So they have that right. They don't have the right to target civilians. So the much bigger question is, how does anyone think this ends just by the Palestinians rolling over, giving up and saying, you know what, enjoy your apartheid. It's not been great for us, but maybe we can find a way to enjoy it. Maybe occupation and being destroyed and being displaced is more fun than we made it out to be. I'm saying that flippantly because it is an unrealistic, an unacceptable, actually, position.
Indeed. Would I be wrong to start my next question with the ICJ ruled that Israel was committing a plausible genocide? Or was it that the ICJ ruled that Israel was in danger, in plausible danger of committing a genocide? Whichever you think it is, we've now seen famine. No food is going in. All the humanitarian aids have been blocked. No new tents have gone in, medical supplies, and now 70% of the water has now been blocked by Israel. Talk to me about the correct, and I would like you to correct me, the correct ruling from the ICJ, in case I am wrong, which of my statements or those quotes are wrong, and also why I am right in calling this as genocide, or am I wrong in calling it a genocide, given all that we know in the last 17 months?
Okay. So, Ireti, what happened was that South Africa brought a case to the ICJ of possible violations of the Genocide Convention by Israel. And of course, genocide has a legal definition. You don't have to successfully eradicate the entirety of the community being targeted for it to be considered to constitute a genocide. What the ICJ, first of all, had to decide is whether they would take the case, right? You can't just go and say, I think this country is doing this. There's no basis to it. So the ICJ has preliminary hearings. And by an overwhelming majority, I think in most instances it was 17-2 judges, the ICJ puts forward a series of rulings where, first of all, it accepts the validity of moving forward with the case. In other words, in plain English, we'll hear this because the case has been established that there is a plausible genocide here. It goes further and it issues a set of provisional urgent measures that Israel has to take to not be in violation of the ICJ's ruling that it is endangering genocide by continuing with these measures. And that is around the provision of humanitarian assistance, that is around the nature of the targeting, that is around the incitement to genocide, that it's documented in those court hearings that senior Israeli figures. If people remember Rwanda, and I'm sure people do, and radio Rwanda and the statements of leaders, and some of them ended up in the ICC, of course, in the International Criminal Court. Israel is in violation of those urgent measures. It refused to adhere to the provisional ruling. So what we have at the moment is a provisional ruling. We do not yet have a final ruling, and these things take their time to work through the ICJ. We will almost certainly have a ruling on a different genocide case brought by the Gambia to the ICJ, which is the case of the Rohingya and the state of Myanmar. So we're expecting, and that will give us a clue perhaps as to how the court is defining genocide. In the meantime, several countries have joined the South African deposition, adding their own voices, their own weight, their own evidence to the notion that there is a question of genocide to be answered here. The other thing that's gone on simultaneously is that the International Criminal Court decided to do its investigation. And the chair of the court made a request for arrest warrants against 3 senior Hamas officials for what it considered to be war crimes that they had undertaken. All 3 have subsequently been assassinated by Israel. So they are no longer relevant in terms of that particular issuing of arrest warrants. And the court issued a request for arrest warrants, which was backed up by the judges. So there are now arrest warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the former Defense Minister, Mr. Gallant. And that is for war crimes, and in particular, something that you refer to, which is the use of starvation as a weapon of war. And so Netanyahu made a point of traveling internationally. He traveled to Hungary, which is a member of the ICC, or was. Hungary just withdrew from the ICC. Other countries have said they wouldn't allow Netanyahu to come. Others have said they would. The US is not a member of the ICC. Netanyahu has been in the US. That's the legal position we're in. There is another, just to go deeper for one more minute, Ireti, if I may. There is another International Court of Justice intervention from July 19th of last year. This predated the events of October and since, which was a request from the United Nations General Assembly in a resolution that had overwhelming support for the Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on the questions around the legality of the occupation now being so permanent. The court last ruled in 2004. And in that advisory opinion, that's where the court speaks about the occupation in its entirety constituting a violation of international law, being illegal. It notes the responsibilities of third-party states not to be complicit in this violation of international law, and that pertains to trade with Israel, trade with the settlers, arms trade, etc., and how one needs to make good on that. And I think for the first time, the court acknowledges that Israel is in violation on the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And in that hearing, you had a record number of states make submissions, and you had, for the first time, it was about 24 states and regional actors who used the legal term apartheid to define the situation. And that's where the court acknowledged that in its reference to the so-called Third Convention. The African Union, in its intervention at the court, also used the word apartheid.
This is, very quickly, most unusual. This is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong again, where Israel, in all the cases you've mentioned, all the judgments, has pretty much been condemned by the courts, or at least been warned. Prior to that, there's been many cases at the ICC, at the ICJ against Israel, where we haven't had rulings on. So when people say that the UN serves no purpose anymore, very quickly, what would you say to that? Because I've still got like 3 or 4 questions for you.
So the very quick answer to that is, and I think this is where people are kind of, what do we do? Because what you now have, Ireti, because you're absolutely right, we've not been in this, we're in a new legal reality. But what we now have is this chasm, this huge gap between the legal reality we're in and the reality we're in, where Israel can still get arms, can still conduct these atrocities in Gaza, can still get away with it. Partly that's because these things move slowly, and partly, and I really think this is the case, a lot of the world is looking at that and just saying, well, wait a minute. If this were my country that were found in violation of these things, there'd be consequences. Stuff would happen. Why is the West making an exception? Because it's a country that it's an ally of. So you had the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, saying he had been approached by Western senior officials to say, hey, we didn't set up this court so you could try our friends. This was supposed to be used against our enemies and against Africans. And it's, so one expects the court to be used against what Trump likes to call shithole countries. But when it comes to a country that's an ally, supplied by, backed by, when it's the West that is making possible a genocide, then it's the court's rulings are ignored. And it's not like, wow, breaking news, Ireti, there's hypocrisy in the world. I got to tell you something you never thought of. Of course, that's not the case. But it's how brazen that I think has been a wake-up call.
15 paramedics, including aid workers, were killed. Their bodies were buried in shallow, well, to call it a grave, I would just say it was covered with sand, because I think to call it a grave is almost kind of qualifying it. It was covered with sand, and so was one of the ambulances. Israel had initially said, and even I asked this of the ambassador last week, he did say that, look, I think he said 8 of them were Hamas. Number one. Number two, he said the ambulances, the Red Crescent ambulances, didn't have their sirens on. We've since seen new evidence. It came out on Saturday. It literally came out the next day after my interview, which was found in the pocket of one of the deceased, that this is not true. They did have their sirens on. They were clearly visible. And you could see that they were literally going to work and they were being shot at and they were being killed. What are your thoughts on that? Especially as often Israel will argue and deny initially until we see evidence. And then, of course, they would always say they're members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or whoever, without giving us any evidence to back that up. Now they're saying there's only 5 of them. I think initially it was 8 of them. What are your thoughts on that very quickly?
Yeah, they never provide the evidence. And so it's layer upon layer of misinformation, of lies, actually. And, you know, that's what they resort to. They know that in some places, the US and elsewhere, they can get away with it. They know they have a relatively friendly media in large parts of the world. I mean, we know, you know, they went after the hospitals in Gaza, and then they took some foreign, I think CNN and other camera crews down into the hospitals when they destroyed those hospitals. And they said, here's the proof. And they showed this document in Arabic, and they said, this is the names of the, and the thing, I mean, this is how also amateurish it was. Someone that says, that's the days of the week. What they showed in Arabic was the days of the week and the rotas of the nurses, I think it was. I mean, yeah, it's not even a level of sophistication a lot of the time. So unfortunately, what you have thus far is the ability to get away with this. But what we are seeing is the methodical attempt to go after aid workers, UN workers, journalists, people in your profession, Ireti. And what this is about is not about security or defense or hostages. This is about creating irreversible facts on the ground and making this place unlivable for Palestinians as a way of trying to end the conflict by permanently removing and displacing one of the peoples. And, you know, that has me ashamed as a Jewish person and as someone who is as a dual national Israeli, and it has me terrified as a human, because bad things happen in the world. Something this methodical, that's also using some of the new technology. Some of what they're using is AI, robotic, automated weaponry. It should have us all worried, because if you can get away with it in one place, you can get away with it elsewhere. And that's why, you know, people have got lots of things to worry about, but this matters.
Indeed. We had Trump's plan of the Riviera, Gaza Riviera. We then had the Egyptian Arab plan, which it seems has now been, at the best, parked aside or pushed aside. And then we've had Netanyahu's plan, Israeli plan. We've always had the Ben Gvir plan and all of those. Ehud Barak was on CNN recently, and I'd like you to listen to what he said. Just going to play like 2 or 3 minutes of the clip to you. And I'd like your response on that, please.
Do you think that Bibi Netanyahu and the people around him actually want the reoccupation of Gaza, followed by then massive population expulsion of Palestinians, which will then lead to the Trump plan of a vacant Gaza?
You know, it sounds a little bizarre, but the science on the table is that they are heading there somehow. Netanyahu already established a kind of a new entity under the umbrella of the Minister of Defense. The IDF refused to take part of it. That will be organizing the transfer of the willing. Now, if it was about to come to New York, North America, even Canada, people might find some 100,000, 200,000. But if it goes to Somaliland or other places like this, no one will want to move. And anyhow, it's totally impractical. I believe that it was a good idea that launched by Trump to shake the whole thing and impose both Israel and the Egyptians, and so this to bring some more realistic ideas. And I think, and I believe that Witkoff and President Trump understand that that's not realistic.
I've been told by friends of mine in Israel that the IDF, the army, would actually probably refuse to participate in a forced ethnic expulsion of 2 million Palestinians.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. The IDF as an organization will probably refuse, and it will be very costly if they won't, because the international community will come after Israeli officers and leaders, political leaders, and will demand accountability. But there is a huge debate, especially right now, following 7th of October. There is still, after a year and a half, a strong pain and deep kind of rage and feeling of humiliation and calls for revenge, which are humane, natural. You cannot even criticize those kind of emotions coming after the barbarian attack of Hamas. But having said that, that's not a good recipe for strategic mind, for leadership. And so leadership should see the vision over the immediate emotions, however humane and justifiable on individual, even collective terms. Strategy should be led by a clear-cut, sober, painfully sober realities and decision how to move forward. Otherwise, you pay the price of not having this kind of thought in advance.
I have to say, at 83, you remain.
I do if we can, I hope we can cover that, because I've still got one more question for you of a development that happened this week. What did you make of what Ehud Barak said? I thought it was very, very interesting and balanced.
Look, I absolutely agree. And that last point is, you know, we didn't get where we wanted. And when I worked in government, it was under Ehud Barak. We didn't get where I would hope we would have got then. But there's something he said which really resonates for me. Where are those realistic voices today? He said you have to be painfully sober. And that's such an important acknowledgement. You know, revenge, the heat of the moment is a poor guide to policy. But it's more than that. And that's what he's also referring to. Messianic extremism as government policy in this kind of a conflict zone is a really, really dangerous place to go. And that's precisely where we are. And what Trump does when he makes what you referred to just before, Ireti, and Ehud Barak referred to, when he makes this Gaza Riviera suggestion and says we can get all the Palestinians out. And then when Netanyahu was in Washington just recently, he said, you know, you owned it, which of course isn't the case. Israel illegally occupied it. We might own it in the future. He praised Turkey for managing to own parts of Syria. I mean, I get it. You're a real estate magnate. I also get it. It's America. You know, you're a settler colonial space yourselves, of course. Built on slavery, built on the evisceration of the indigenous peoples in that part of the world. Do you really not understand that some people are actually rooted in their land? They have an indigenous attachment. Do you not realize that Palestinians are not going to say, oh, fine, where do you want us to go? And by doing this, Trump gave a tremendous and hugely dangerous boost to the extremists in the Israeli government who genuinely believe that they can forcibly remove, whether physically with killing or displacing Palestinians. And what we are in right now is this zero-sum race to the bottom. And the race is, can Israel succeed in getting rid of the Palestinians before the thing that Ehud Barak just referenced happens, before Israeli society starts to unravel and those threads pull it apart? Because I tend to agree with Barak that they won't be able to do it. Israel, let's say Israel says, you know what, we won't force the Palestinians out, we'll bring in a mercenary force. You know what, we'll find third countries. Who's going to pay the mercenary force? Who's going to pay the third country to take them? And this is where, again, as I said, not for love of Palestinians, but because this is a misplaced priority for Israel, I don't think enough of the Israeli public will go with it. And we're already seeing that reservists are not showing up well, Netanyahu is really worried because many are not showing up. They just kicked a whole load of pilots from the reserve force out the army because they wrote a letter, over 1,000 of them, saying what we are doing now in Gaza is not about the hostages and it's not about Israeli security. It's an unacceptable political consideration.
And life must always come first. My last two questions. I'm not sure which is going to be shorter, but let me start with this. We've seen a very incredibly unexpected development in the UK this week, where Hamas is challenging the prescription of the organization as a terror group. Talk to us about that. And what do you think the chances are?
Yeah, it's a fascinating development that
Absolutely.
I still want to wrap my head around, and I haven't spoken to the people I need to speak to about this on the legal side of things and in terms of how that might play. What they've done is they've challenged designation and they've said there's nothing to show that we pose a threat to the UK, that we're operate in the UK, that we operate outside of the Palestinian geographical expanse, and therefore, to criminalize people in the UK for being somehow involved with Hamas and to designate us, that's my understanding of the case at least, is not something that passes legal muster. Now, what I think is interesting here is it's a couple of things. First, the whole idea of terror designations, right? Of course, there are places where those make sense. But in many instances, this is used as a political way of avoiding negotiations. And in even more instances, if you actually want, when you've got a wicked problem, that wicked in the sense of it being entrenched and so hard to resolve, you're going to have to eventually get in a room with some of those people. Maybe those movements divide. Maybe those movements have legitimate political grievances, and sometimes they just need to be defeated. But in the case of Hamas, which clearly is speaking to decades of Palestinian dispossession and occupation and apartheid regime, you're not going to resolve this militarily. Israel has failed to defeat Hamas militarily, which deviates from your question about the UK. But I think it really brings to the fore the fact that Hamas is saying, we are here, we're a political actor. By the way, you have a UK national security advisor today in number 10 Downing Street called Jonathan Powell. And his work of the last few years is we need to negotiate. And that's what he did in Ireland. We need to negotiate, not with mindless extremists who also use violence, but with people who are political, armed resistance wings of political movements. That was Ireland. By the way, he was talking to the HTS, who are now the leadership in Syria, because they were considered an affiliate to Al-Qaeda, etc. And I think it's also sending a signal, we're here, we're open to dialogue. One of Trump's envoys actually met with Hamas. We need to get over this nonsense that you can't talk to Hamas. Hamas is a political actor. Hamas has been willing to go into Palestinian elections as they did in the past. Hamas has been willing to hand over governance of Gaza, just not to the occupiers.
Finally, before I let you go, we're at a junction as human beings, I would say. Every single one of us right now is being called to interrogate what it means to be human and what we make of others. Talk to me about the moral imperative for each of us, given what we've seen in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in the last 17 months. What's the moral imperative for each of us as a human?
You know, it's the hardest part of it, Ireti, because I don't consider myself to be, some naive, wide-eyed optimist. And yet, if you'd have said to me, this is what will be done to Palestinians, there will be this terrible event after decades of occupation. It will shake things. The Israelis will respond aggressively. This is how long it will go on for. This is how far it will go. This will be the degree of the suffering, and this will be the degree of willingness to allow Israel to get away with it. I would have said, you know, I'm as hard-nosed as the next person, but come on, it wouldn't go that far. Yeah, you're not going to have an American president that says, let's displace them. You're not going to have, which has been set up in Israel. They have set up something, Ehud Barak referred to it, called the Directorate for the Voluntary Immigration of Gaza Residents. There's nothing voluntary about getting people out of a place that you just destroyed and that you're preventing any food, fuel, water, electricity from getting into. If you'd have told me this is where we got them, I'd have said, humanity's in a bad place, but not that bad, Ireti. And here we are. And it's that bystander phenomenon. And I think that's why this is a test that goes so far beyond Palestine. And Palestine's not the only place where bad things are happening, but the magnitude of this, the fact that we're willing to apparently let what is an imperfect, a wobbling international architecture of law, of institutions, that we're letting it collapse even further. You know, at a time when we're entering this multipolar moment, where the effects of climate change are going to make us all, put us all in a more precarious place. The fact that we cannot come together and say, this line cannot be crossed, that's where it's so painful and it's so necessary also not to give up. You know, a Palestinian author has put out a book saying, in some years we will all have been against this. It's too late if we're all against this in some years. Yeah, everyone from the smallest protest to the highest office holder has a role to play, because at the end of the day, that permissive environment for things like this to occur will affect all of us. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you.
The analyst and former Israeli negotiator, and incidentally, he was also former advisor to Ehud Barak, who you heard there, and he didn't know I was going to be playing that clip. I'd like to get your comments before my next guest comes on. 020127709993, 020146579190, and you can send your WhatsApp. I would hope you to send your WhatsApp to 0809597585. I'm coming to your calls now. Let's talk. Hello.
Hey, good evening. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I have to, ask the ambassador if it comes up later. I wanted to ask him to define humanity and what is the reality of humanity definition with what is actually happening right now in Israel versus Gaza situation and the conspiracy of the West. Ordinarily, the people who ought to be the judge were now being partisan because of whatever narrow interest. And I love that interview. You did very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you. You can still call. I have a couple of minutes before my next guest, His Excellency, the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman. You can call me on 020. I'm coming to your calls now.
Evening, Yogi.
Good evening, Emmanuel.
Last week, there this question I wanted to ask the ambassador.
But he's coming on at 5. Can you save it for him when I open up his... Okay. Yes, he's come. He's my next guest. His Excellency is my next guest. Yeah? Okay.
Fantastic interview, granted,
Thank you.
But what has happened so far is beyond just... I know you journalists, you are doing your best. In fact, I really feel for you because more than 200 journalists have been killed so far, in the war. And even courageous to take the time to interview people, your colleagues, But I'm still surprised, that some people in the hierarchy of power within the American system, are still supporting this, because that is the threat the Israeli government have, that is what they are briefing, to take on this atrocity, to carry on with this atrocity. But I hope a day will come where reason will prevail, because the power does not last forever, and power do shift. And it would be unfortunate tomorrow if nuclear or weapons, are dropping on Israel tomorrow, and then they are crying for justice. So I don't really know how to resolve all these issues, because to be honest with you, with Trump in power, I don't know. I don't know CCOB, and it's frustrating.
Thank you very much. Right, I think I have WhatsApp messages. Do I? Yes. Let me just read your WhatsApp message. Oh, I think it was on Facebook. Oh, if you're gonna call, I'm gonna give you 1 minute very quickly. Hello.
Hello. Good evening, CCOB.
Good evening. What's your name and where you calling from?
I'm Engineer Kundayo from Ikorodu.
Go ahead, Engineer.
Please, I have listened to your guest. I want him to throw more light on the outcome of the recent visit of Netanyahu to Trump in the U.S. as regards the Palestinian and the Gaza issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Although that was a pre-recorded interview, I'm coming to your calls. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Miss Good
afternoon.
I appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
I have been listening to you. You are a great woman.
Thank you.
God will continue to lift you up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
This is Joyce from Eva.
Okay, thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Right, if you could, I can still squeeze in a minute or two. Right, let me read your WhatsApp. I think I have a message from Facebook, and I'm going to try and read it. Israel is a terrorist state. Its dealing with all Palestinians shows the issue is not about Hamas. The world has never seen a state so callous, barbaric to fellow human beings, not sparing children in brutality. Even Adolf Hitler never did 1/3 of what's there. I don't think I wouldn't go that far, if I may say so. That's Abdulaziz Aliu. Adolf Hitler killed 6 million Jews. So we really have to be careful when we make these comparisons, when you make these juxtapositions. You've got to make sure that it's fact-based. That is not fact-based, but I understand, and I have heard you. Right, I've got to go. Have I got a minute, Zainab? Yes, I have. 1 minute. Hello. Oh, I don't. I'm afraid I don't. Apparently, I don't have a minute. I don't have a minute.
Hello, good afternoon.
Stay listening. Stay listening. We'll be right back after the news. Yvonne is here.
.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.